everybody, to episode 7 of Tech Safe. My name is Cece Doucette, and I am the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, as well as the Education Services Director of the international nonprofit Wireless Education. And we want to give a shout out to WCCA TV in Worcester, Massachusetts, that's been so gracious to give us this opportunity to provide information on wireless technology risks and, most importantly, safer technology solutions that we simply don't hear about through mainstream media channels because they have a heavy bias with the wireless industry in their funding or outright ownership. So in our last episode, we were joined by Rob and Dana Strayton off of the island of Chappaquiddick here in Massachusetts, who began to develop neurological issues, heart issues, and other symptoms when a cell tower was constructed next to their property on their neighbor's land, and then especially the day that the 5G cell antennas were turned on and added to that cell tower. So welcome back, Dana and Rob. Thank you again for taking your time to be with us here today. So in episode 6, we talked about the fact that you got blindsided by this horrible monstrosity that was constructed right next to your property line.
Correct.
You began having symptoms. Dana, your family is from the north end of Boston. We talked about the restaurants. Your family has been one of them for many years. And all these small cells are now all over Hanover Street and the entire north end. And then you have them out in Chappaquiddick, which was this bucolic area that you went to live unplugged in a clean, healthy environment. So this is happening everywhere. It's happening in Worcester. It's happening in my town of Ashland. Every town, the industry is trying to build out their next revenue stream for 5G and the Internet of Things. And it makes good sense for them, but it does not make good sense for our communities because close range microwave radiation transmitters are toxic. So if you could help us to understand, Rob, you told us that your heart went into AFib the day that cell tower fired up the 5G antennas, and you left in an ambulance.
I did, yeah.
And you also mentioned that you both had neurological issues, some skin issues. Can each of you tell us what your own biochemistry suffered with these exposures?
Sure.
What first started was basically I started to get skin rashes when I was outside in the yard and get very itchy, almost like tingling sensations on my hands and my arms. And I thought it was possibly like sun poisoning, but it wasn't. It was actually a reaction to the radiation coming through. I started to get very dizzy all the time, a little bit of nausea. My vision became blurred, and I went to my doctors. I said, listen, I have a lot of dizziness. I have a lot of skin issues. I had difficulty sleeping, exhaustion, memory loss, all of these things. But the vision was very upsetting to me, where I would literally get like a blurred vision after being outside for a period of time. And I had everything checked. I went through extensive at Tufts Medical Center, and really every test that they could think of, and I came up clear.
Yeah, neurological,
physical. I mean, it was, and so basically, when we're at our house, we experience symptoms all the time, and they get worse. And
because it's cumulative with any toxin. The more you're exposed, the worse it gets. And so, Rob, you mentioned neurological and cardio issues.
Yeah. I mean, for me, obviously, the exposure to the radiation caused. I firmly convinced that it was caused by the 5G. That I had this supraventricular tachycardia. And it happened in December 2020 when they turned the 5G on. Happened a month later. Happened again a month later. And of course the response to that is to just increase the amount of medication that I'm taking to actually suppress my heart rate.
Correct.
So
and I think that's really serious for people to know is that they basically maximized his medication to keep his heart rate so low so that it cannot rise again due to the exposure of the 5G.
So,
I mean, think about that.
So that's treating one organ, but your
Right.
entire
Correct.
body and all of its organs. are
And
being
all the
impacted.
effects
and
of
then
that.
and then I certainly have neurological issues of memory loss, inability to really sort of concentrate and focus.
And
I
you
get
guys were
headaches.
otherwise
I was
healthy
perfectly
people,
healthy.
Perfectly
I was
healthy.
right?
perfectly healthy.
Perfectly healthy.
Oh, so when you started talking about this feeling of tingling out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, there was a cell tower put up by Verizon on top of a neighborhood just as everybody was sent home to stay, homebound for the pandemic. And this little girl comes downstairs one morning and goes, "Mama, my head really hurts." And Rob, you were about to say headaches too. Yeah. And she said, "And I feel all buzzy inside," right? And then when you talk about the skin, what the science tells us is that we have little antennas on the surface of the skin that help us to navigate through our world. Just like the birds and the bees, they all have navigation systems built in that are meant to be synchronized with the Earth's electromagnetic field. That pulses electrons 7.83 times a second. That's called Schumann's resonance. What we've done with man-made energy is now we're in the megahertz range and the gigahertz range. A megahertz is 1 million pulses of spiked man-made radiation per second. And gigahertz is 1 billion pulses per second. So it's no wonder when you find yourself in your yard next to a cell tower that has 3G, 4G, and now 5G antennas, that you've got this whole mix of all these different frequencies just bombarding you. So for anybody who lives near a cell tower or one of these small cells that are showing up outside the curb, there's no knight in shining armor coming to protect you. Public policy catches up after the public raises the issue and after it goes through the courts. So I think Rob and Dana can give us some experiences that they've been through and perhaps some inspiration about what really, if they knew what they knew today, what would they have done
Absolutely.
back then?
And I just want to preface this with the medical effects are something that we have not been able to fight successfully.
What do you mean fight?
Meaning his
in court, where,
In court.
a lot of they've really pushed back, and again, there's this perception caused by the telecom industry that claims that you can't raise health concerns related to wireless technology, and that's absolutely untrue. First of all, you have a First Amendment right to say anything you want.
Correct.
Yeah, I think what that boils down to is if somebody denies the placement of a cell tower application, right?
Correct.
If you do that, you need to write up why you denied it.
Yep.
That's where you don't want to say health effects
Correct.
because that could shoot you in the foot. But the community can absolutely talk about
Absolutely.
it. They
Yeah.
just can't deny today, they can't deny an application based on that.
Correct.
But there is a very important court case that was won back on, actually it was Friday the 13th of August in 2021, because for 6 years there was an open file, they call it a docket, with the Federal Communications Commission, and it was opened in 2013, and scientists and doctors and citizens all poured in testimony that showed that radio frequency microwave radiation from any source is extraordinarily harmful. And then at the end of December 2019, so mind you, they left that docket open for 6 years while the industry just pushed more and more wireless into our world. At the end of 2019, they closed that docket and they made a ruling that went to something called the Federal Register that made it official. This is
Right.
what we think. We don't need to update our microwave radiation public exposure limits that were done in 1996 based on how much heat from one device would it take, even with a spacer there, not even right up against your head, how much heat would it take from that device to raise the temperature of the gel inside of this military mannequin's head? The guy was modeled off as somebody who's 220 pounds, 6'3", 90th percentile military fitness. Has nothing to do with you or I. None of us are built like that. Let alone, we don't have gel inside our skull. We've got a fully functioning brain with neurons firing all the time. So the way they set up the public radiation limits were only based on that heat limit, how much heat in a very short amount of time. And so it has nothing to do with where we are today. So when that determination by the FCC that they weren't going to change those limits hit the Federal Register, then the lawsuits began. And the Environmental Health Trust and the Children's Health Defense Fund were two of the biggest ones, but there were also others who joined that lawsuit because the industry and the FCC have completely ignored the science.
Completely.
And when that case went before the courts, there were 11,000 pages of evidence entered into the public record that were presented to these three judges, 27 big binders. And they're looking through and seeing all this evidence of harm. And they say to the FCC, well, how did you determine this is safe? And the FCC went, well, the FDA said it was okay. Well, not one of our federal agencies has ever looked at the science.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So we have a big gap in public policy at the federal level.
Yeah, I don't know that the FDA has even really ever looked at it in any depth, right?
They don't have any expertise. They have no biological experts anywhere in their organization. So what the court said is, my understanding is that the courts don't like to tell our federal agencies what to do. They like to give them the opportunity to fix it themselves. So they remanded this back to the FCC, going almost on 2 years, it'll be in August, to say you need to account for what it's doing to the environment, you need to account for children, you need to account for infertility, and the long-term cumulative effects, and those who have become electromagnetically sensitive.
Correct.
So they haven't done anything. And so Scott McAuliffe and Children's Health Defense just sent a petition to the courts again to say, look, let's make the FCC do their job because they dropped the ball and people are getting harmed every single day.
Yeah, it's interesting. We were going through our hearing process, and I had the application from AT&T to build the cell tower. There's a section in that deals specifically with radiation exposure, and of course the standard there is if it meets FCC guidelines, right? That's the only standard. But when you actually dive into it, there's a table there, and one of what the table shows is an exposure level for somebody working on the tower, and exposure level for people in the community in the vicinity. And in our case, the exposure limit from our cell tower to us is 30 minutes. So I don't know
30 minutes.
30 minutes. We should
What
not.
happens to the other 23 and a half hours a day?
We have supraventricular tachycardia. We have skin issues. We have a variety of illnesses caused by that tower. And so the industry knows it's unsafe. I mean, they know that it's not. They know that it's not safe,
But what is it all about? The dollar? Follow the dollar, bottom line?
It is. I mean, just look at how much money the carriers make. It's billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars.
And when we started our lawsuits, because I know we're going to get into that, AT&T stood up in one of the hearings in the beginning and said, we don't want a long, protracted lawsuit. We don't want to go through that. Yet they've been fighting us tooth and nail for 6 years.
Well,
6 years.
6
6
years.
And
3 different court cases. We went after the zoning board, the planning board, and the Martha's Vineyard Commission, which is a regional authority.
Okay.
And we have been fighting all of them for six years.
6 years.
So I remember in conversations that you shared with me a long time ago, it seems like maybe there were precedents set in years prior, and so the judges are like, oh yeah, this has already been discussed, there's no problem here, we're not going to approve any of these lawsuits. So is that still the climate today?
Yeah, I think that, again, I think the industry is very influential. They have created a perception,
Correct.
right? It's not really settled law. It's not. It really is a perception. As I was saying, that you can't raise in 2 different trials. Because of my heart condition, I have a number of medical devices that I use. Very clearly those devices say that they are subject to interference from electromagnetic radiation. We had experts do calculations based upon the formula in the manuals for those devices that show unequivocally that those devices are subject to interference from the tower, and that I would have to be 800 feet outside of my property line in order to have those devices function properly. Those are medical devices that I rely on for my well-being, and in two different court cases, three, quite frankly, the appeals court wouldn't refuse to allow that evidence in, and it's all predicated upon this, as you had mentioned, denying a cell tower for health effects. Well, it's not a question of health effects per se. It's a medical device.
Right.
Does it or does it not interfere with the medical device,
right,
regardless of what the effect is to my health? And so there really is, I think, an education process that needs to happen in the courts, with medical doctors. I mean, this is a very important topic.
It is, and there are groundbreaking actions happening out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood. The neighbors started feeling like you guys were feeling, and for the first time in the United States, the Pittsfield City Council commanded their Board of Health to do an investigation. The Pittsfield Board of Health investigated for 15 months. They spoke to the doctors who had given the electromagnetic illness diagnoses to the children and the adults in the community. They spoke with world-leading scientists whose life's work is to investigate these biological effects, and to engineers who understand, like you were saying, what are the specs, what do we need to do, how far back do we need to be. And they also spoke with the industry. Now, in Pittsfield, Verizon brought in one of their so-called experts by the name of Dr. Eric Swanson. And he is a physicist, he's a PhD, so he sounds impressive. And if you read what Pittsfield did, they drew up an emergency order documenting all of their findings, and they investigated this so-called industry expert. He's a paid expert. Absolutely. He comes in and he tells our towns, oh, it's fine, it's all within the FCC guidelines, and it's all, microwave radiation doesn't hurt anybody. Well, the Pittsfield Board of Health went and looked at his credentials. He has never published one single study on radio frequency radiation. He specializes in quarks and other physics, topics.
Right, and that's what happens with the creation of the FCC standards. It's never he's not a medical doctor. He's a physicist. He's a theorist.
Right.
And it's never a medical professional, a biologist.
Mm-hmm.
They're never involved. They've never been involved in setting the standards.
Yeah, even all the way up to the World Health Organization, they keep populating it with industry people on the EMF groups, electromagnetic field investigators up there. So that's why it comes right back down to you and I and educating our community. Yeah.
And most of the experts that the telecommunication industry brings in are their paid experts that only have one result, right? But they always have the same result. You could never go back into their curriculum vitae and look to see that they ever voted against anything that the Telecommunications Act wasn't for.
It's terrible.
Right.
So, but one of the good things that's happening in Pittsfield right now is that, and this is never a smooth road. We raise our hands and thinks the authorities, the powers that be, will just fix this, and that just clear that right off the deck and lower your expectations.
Correct.
Because we have to carry the ball down the field the entire way before we're going to resolve this. So in Pittsfield, the Board of Health wrote this emergency order to say, Verizon, here's 7 days. Please come to the table and let's work this out. There was a property owner in Pittsfield who had commercial land and said, we don't care if you move the cell tower here. It's nowhere near residential. So there are solutions. But Verizon did not come to the table. At the 11th hour, they went to the court here in Worcester and got an injunction against the Pittsfield Board of Health, saying that the Telecom Act says that they have no right to try and stop us. Meanwhile, the Board of Health had already consulted with their state-level attorneys who believe that what the FCC Telecom Act law says is that in the siting of a cell tower, you have to follow these rules. Once that goes up and gets turned on, If there is harm to the people or the environment, that is now the jurisdiction of the Board of Health. That is their duty
Right.
to
Great.
safeguard public safety. So that's what this case, and so,
That's great.
and you know, you talk about politicians who might have favoritism or conflicts of interest with the industry. It looks like that's what's happened in Pittsfield. Mayor Tyre and the city solicitor Pagnotta both have conflicts of interest with the wireless industry. And maybe some of their city council members, but some of those city council members have been great, and their Board of Health has been great. But the city council told the Board of Health to investigate. They did their job. They wrote this emergency order. And when it came down to needing to take this to court, their mayor, their city solicitor, their city council would not even give their own Board of Health the money to get these people back home into their houses, because they determined their homes were uninhabitable.
Oh my gosh.
And
That's
so
such
that
an
may
important
that
case.
may bode well for you. So there
Absolutely.
was a court case. The citizens brought it to court. Paul Revere is an attorney here in Massachusetts, who I know you guys have done a lot of work with.
He's our attorney as well.
And
Fantastic.
Scott McAuliffe, who represented
our
this
attorney.
national case, they are the ones that are representing these citizens in Pittsfield. So the court hearing was April 6th. There were a couple more filings that were going to happen, amicus briefs from others. And it's critically important to know that the Massachusetts Association of Health Boards sent in a friend of the court letter to support the citizens, an amicus brief. So these are groundbreaking
Great.
actions that can hopefully help in Chappaquiddick as well.
I hope so. I mean, we've had a very, very long battle.
Yeah, and all of that information is very easily accessible at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And if you go to our events, or I'm sorry, not our events page, but if you go to our state efforts page and you go down to the Department of Public Health and Health and Human Services, you will find the amicus brief, you will find the lawsuit, you will find the emergency order, as well as the groundbreaking New Hampshire Commission report. They're the only state-level government that has investigated this, and they document the captured agencies with the FCC, the FDA, and the wireless industry, and make 15 recommendations to bring hardwired technology to and through the premises. And I just attended a meeting in Worcester here on Monday night, and Verizon said they are already rolling out fiber to the premises, which is great, but they need to stop and not put any small cell nodes up right outside people's homes.
Correct.
To get fixed wireless. If they, they're telling the public fixed wireless is great, but it's really harmful. But they want to sell this service, so they want to put everything everywhere. And we need to get rid of the wireless in our communities. The cell towers are far enough away to make an emergency call today, and we should never, ever allow close range cell
Right.
towers.
Right. Yeah.
And
I mean,
we have that conversation in most of our town meetings where if it can work at this location, why can it not work a mile into the woods?
yeah.
Right.
And if it can't
And
work
that
a
was-
mile away, then this doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And they would not give that any credibility. And when the AT&T, what we discovered during one of our trials was that AT&T changes the criteria of their mapping for every single.
So the signal
Yes, I'm
strength,
gonna-
what they
thank
did
you.
was they manipulated, they use a standard, in-building coverage, right? And so what does that necessarily mean? And they look at, they're really describing, concrete buildings. Of course, on Chappaquiddick, it's all wood frame houses. There's no concrete buildings. And what they actually do is they manipulate the signal strength. So there was one standard that they
To show that they have a gap in coverage?
to try and make one alternative site
Better.
look less provide less coverage than the site that they really want. So they manipulate the signal strengths, the standard that they use. So the thing is that they use one signal strength that they have to file with the FCC what the coverage area is for every tower. Well, that's one standard. And it's it's a negative 130 decibels, right? It's measured in negative decibels. The one that they were using for us was negative 94 decibels. The alternative sites were like negative 96, 98 decibels. So they manipulate what they consider to be an acceptable signal strength in the different alternative site mapping that they do. And if you don't understand it, you don't understand it's actually measured negative decibels, and therefore, that higher number is
I'll tell you,
lesser.
Rob, this just goes way
Yeah,
over my
it
head.
is, but
Yeah.
the
This
gist
is
of
where
it.
you should engage somebody
Correct.
who understands.
But the gist of it is our planning board said, we don't know how to read this, but yet they weren't willing to hire an expert and that's what one of the things you can learn is that if your board says to you when you see an application come forward and they say to you, we don't understand how to read this,
They really are required to then bring in a consultant.
because all they see is the pretty colors, and this is what this
Right.
is the orange coverage, and this is this
So-
is the yellow coverage.
So
and-
white is no coverage, was that, and again, because they don't understand how those signal strengths are being manipulated. The things that I have heard in these hearings are just so patently untrue. It's
Yeah, we were
terrifying.
hearing that even up
Yeah.
in the public hearings in New Hampshire, listening to the industry tell all these untrue facts that they
Untrue
were
facts.
peddling as facts.
Correct.
So Rob, I understand that you actually threw your hat in the ring to serve on one of your municipal boards.
Yeah, so we hadn't done a master plan, and so part of your master planning process should be a wireless overlay district and looking at your wireless bylaws.
Yeah.
And so we hadn't done that in Edgartown in over 30 years. That was one of the things I raised in the hearings. As a result, they decided to create a new master plan, and I volunteered to be on that. So I'm on the executive committee of the Edgartown Master Plan Committee.
Well, I hope there are enough balls in play today that you guys will ultimately be able to remain in your home safely. I
hope so.
For those who are listening in with us today, if you sign up with us at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, on each page there's a Join the Effort button there. And we know people do what they can when they can. We know this is a big issue, but if we don't start these conversations in our own communities, nobody else is going to protect us. And, we have so many great examples of towns that are successfully updating their zoning code that it's not as heavy of a lift as it was when you guys first fell down the rabbit hole
Correct.
6 years
absolutely.
ago. So please join us at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. That's MA4 safetech.org. And Rob and Dana, how can people get in touch with you if they would like to?
Yes.
I think easiest is email, and that's my email address, Rob, R-O-B, Strayton, S-T-R-A-Y-T-O-N, at Comcast.net.
Okay.
Yes.
And if anybody missed that and wants to reach out at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, it'll come straight to me. So I will
We're
put
happy
you in
to
touch.
help.
Yep.
We have a
and-
lot of wealth of information that we couldn't
Yes.
even present here today about planning boards and zoning boards.
Okay, well, thank you, Rob and
Yes.
Dana, so much for sharing
Thank
your
you.
experience, and have a tech safe day. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.